Chapter 25, Part 3. Now we're going to talk about water pollution. Usually water pollution is caused by industrial, municipal, or agricultural sources. Some of the pollutants include organic waste, heated water, sediments from soil runoff, nutrients including fertilizers, and human and animal waste, and toxic chemicals and other hazardous substances. The goal of the Clean Water Act is safe swimming water, protection of fish and wildlife, and the elimination of the discharge of pollutants into waterways. The Clean Water Act also sets specific schedules that limit the discharge of various types of pollutants based upon the technology available for controlling them. It operates through a permit system for point-of-source emissions. Under this system, called the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System, municipal, industrial, and agricultural sources must have a permit in order to discharge those pollutants. The permits may be issued only if the discharge will not violate water quality standards, and they must be reissued every 5 years. Again, it's based upon the best available control technology, and that has to be installed. In some situations, there's a weighing factor that the EPA has to use to weigh the cost of the best available control technology versus the benefits received by using it. Wetlands protection. The Clean Water Act prohibits the filling or dredging of wetlands unless a permit is issued. The government allows landowners to seek a jurisdictional determination from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers as to whether or not the Clean Water Act applies. If it applies, then the landowner is required to procure a permit before filling or dredging the property. If not, then there's no permit required. Violations. The permits are the key to enforcement. States have primary responsibility for enforcing the permit system, subject to EPA monitoring. Violations are subject to civil and criminal penalties. And here they are. Depending upon the violation, the civil penalty can run from $10,000 to $25,000 per day. If the criminal violation occurs and it was intentional, $2,500 per day and imprisonment for up to 1 year, and a fine up to $1 million and 15 years imprisonment. Drinking water, as opposed to swimming or the other waters that we were talking about. The Safe Drinking Water Act requires the EPA to set maximum levels of pollutants in public water systems. Operators of public water systems must meet the EPA standards as much as possible by using the best available technology that is economically and technologically feasible. I'm thinking right now of Flint, Michigan. You all know what happened there a couple years ago, and I think it's still continuing. They have a very serious water problem with lead getting into their drinking water and causing damage to people, particularly children. Lead can cause brain damage, and it was all caused, I believe, by switching from one water source to another water source that was not clean. Under the Act, drinking water suppliers are required to send an annual statement describing the source of their water to every household that they supply. I guess Flint, Michigan violated that. The statement must disclose the contaminant levels in the water and any possible health concerns associated with the contaminants. Ocean dumping. This is becoming a big issue now as we've discovered the harm that can be done by dumping in the ocean, particularly plastics that don't break down over time. The Marine Protection Research and Sanctuaries Act, or Ocean Dumping Act, regulates the transportation and dumping of pollutions into ocean waters. It prohibits the dumping of radiological, chemical, or biological warfare agents and high-level radioactive waste. The Act established a permit program for transporting and dumping other materials. It also designated certain areas as marine sanctuaries. Violations of it can result in penalties up to $50,000 for any violation of a provision of the Act or failing to get a permit where required. A knowing violation can be criminal and result in a $50,000 fine, imprisonment for not more than a year, or both. Oil pollution. You all may be too young to know about the Exxon Valdez oil spill personally. Perhaps you've read about it or heard about it. But it was a huge tanker that was, I believe, leaving Alaska down the Pacific Ocean, and it caused an oil spill, I think, when it ran up against something that caused a damage to the vessel, and did extraordinary amount of environmental damage to the area, to the wildlife, to the beaches, etc. As a result of that, Congress passed this law that under this act, any oil facility, oil shipper, vessel owner, or vessel operator that discharges oil into navigable waters or onto an adjoining shore may be liable for cleanup costs and damages. Polluters can be ordered to pay for damage to natural resources, private property, and the local economy. This was also true of the accident that occurred in the Gulf, what was it now, about 15 years ago, maybe, that caused substantial damage there. That was a drilling rig in the ocean that exploded, that caused that damage. Okay, pesticides and herbicides are also regulated. The Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, and Rodenticide Act regulates the use of pesticides and herbicides. These substances have to be sold after registration. They have to be certified and used only for approved applications and used in limited quantities when applied to food crops. The EPA has the power to cancel or suspend registration of the substances that it has identified as harmful and can inspect the factories where the chemicals are made. A substance is considered harmful if human exposure to the substance results in risk to 1 in a million or higher of developing cancer. Violations and penalties. If you sell pesticide or herbicide that is unregistered or is canceled or suspended, you can be penalized, and also if you have a false or misleading label, or you destroy or deface a label required under the Act, then these are the penalties, up to $25,000. Producers can be up to $50,000. Farmers and other private users of pesticides or herbicides can be subject up to $1,000 and incarceration up to 30 days. Okay, toxic substances. The Toxic Substances Control Act regulates chemicals and chemical compounds that are known to be toxic. The Act controls the introduction of new chemical compounds by requiring investigation of those possible harmful effects. The EPA can require firms to determine the effects of chemicals on human health and the environment up front. Let me just mention that what we're doing in this chapter is basically going through a lot of federal laws, similar to Chapter 24, which we did not have a video on. How this affects us as individuals is hopefully to protect us from environmental hazards. But for businesses, it is a possible problem if you violate any of these laws in terms of cost, criminal penalties, etc. What do? Well, you could hire a lawyer to tell you all the laws that might affect you. That might be a good thing to do. But again, what I would emphasize is usually belonging to some sort of trade organization will provide you with outlines, information, and those kind of things of what you need to be aware of. And then you may have to seek further advice from a lawyer who's familiar with those laws in order to make sure that your business complies with all the environmental laws. Okay. The EPA can regulate substances that could pose an imminent hazard or an unreasonable risk of injury to the health or the environment. They can also require special labeling, limit the use of substances for specific purposes, set production quotas, or prohibit the use of a substance, excuse me, altogether. Okay, we're going to stop there and we'll pick up with part 4 in the next video. For chapter 25, the magic word is clean.